Good afternoon. Welcome to the July installment of 30 Minutes with LinkSpring. I'm Mark Peacock, Chief Communications Officer and Vice President Marketing at LinkSpring. We're delighted to have you join us today, and thank you. We appreciate it. Today, Peter Leonard, manager of LinkSpring's technical support team, will discuss legacy systems integration using various Niagara drivers, and will cover the planning, prep, and prerequisites that are involved. As always, we will be recording the webinar and we'll make the slide deck available. Should you have a few questions at the conclusion of Peter's presentation, we'd love to field them. And again, please use the chat function. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Peter.
Good afternoon. Hope you all are having a good day. A lot of these things I think we'll cover, some of you are familiar with. I know if you've been doing Niagara work for some time, I know you're familiar with. But I think from our perspective, at least from my perspective, we're going to cover this as a real technical support issue. And what we see, what we commonly run into, what I see a lot of our callers into the tech line bump into, and some of the trauma and the turmoil and the aggravation that they go through. So that being said, I just want to highlight a couple things, whether you understand it or know about it or not. If you want clarification, you're always willing to email us. So some of the highlights here are what the benefits of integration, the caveats to integration, setting up expectations. And that's expectations for both external clients or external personnel as well as internal personnel, your own people. Because I know a lot of times internally within a company you can have your own little battles over how and what you should do and how you should go about it. I'd like to cover just real practical steps to successful integration. We'd like to go over planning your work and then working what you plan out. Maybe touch on an integration example and some of LinkSpring's solutions as well as our own professional services. So jumping into it, benefits of integration. One of the benefits, if you don't already know, is that you preserve the owner's investment in their legacy system. They're not having to replace stuff. That old equipment from 20 years ago is still can still be brought up. It can defer device replacements, meaning an owner wants to replace his system, he doesn't have the budget for it. A year or two from now, he may have the money to do it. So in the meantime, we don't have to replace all this stuff. Let's go ahead and bring it into the Niagara world. And another big one is that it normalizes data, meaning well, I think you know if you do Niagara, that makes it available for all sorts of protocols to hand out to other third parties, and et cetera, et cetera. So the benefits of integration, and I'm gonna skim through this. The benefits, I think a lot of you understand this already, but and I may be repeating some things too. For example, allows data to be reproduced and output in other formats. BACnet, Modbus, LAN, maybe even a third-party driver if you need to talk to somebody into or Andover, whoever. It expands the possibilities for using other communication protocols. So it can become then a bridge to dissimilar systems or other control systems. Anything you have to piece together. And it gives it a common look and feel for everybody, for your whole system. So it's kind of a patchwork quilt on a temporary basis until maybe you can do a unified thing or possibly for years to come. And it allows the owner to have an open system. The caveats, which is probably where our tech support department really comes into play, is that point number one, it is not always plug and play. I get a lot of guys calling occasionally that say, oh, yeah, I can't discover this stuff, or oh, my points don't all come in. No, you're going to have to go in and manually create some stuff. You may or may not have the particular model supported. One of the things to consider right up front is whether or not there is a driver even available for the control system you're trying to integrate. So many things to consider here. It almost always requires expertise as far as the legacy controls themselves and Niagara both. And that's pretty critical. We run into that quite often where the integrator is not really familiar with the equipment he's trying to integrate. And then lo and behold, he's doing a crash course on learning all the caveats and the peculiarities of that particular system. Site-specific expertise is like you really need to know what's in that building and everything about that building if possible. And the more you know, the better off your job's going to be. One thing I don't think is ever given too much thought when you jump into it is the configuration tools necessary for changing anything on a controller level as far as the programming or the configuration or the setup of things. So it's almost always necessary to have the old original configuration tools from the manufacturer. You know, whether that's like Train Rover or a CCN configuration tool, whoever it is, almost all of them have some sort of low-level programming kit that you need. So, bottom line is careful planning, and then execute what you planned, and it becomes critical as well, the changeover. That becomes a critical step. So, onward. As far as external expectations, one thing I want to say is that this sounds kind of strange, but you want to manage the building owner expectations. In other words, control the circumstances out there. Don't let those circumstances control you. Inform your owner ahead of time of what he can expect. And I'm going to run through these as a synopsis, just run them all together. Let him know what to expect. As much as you can let him know. One of the lower points there says manage the migration process and those expectations, meaning if you know you're going to have downtime on equipment, let him know ahead of time. I've been involved in hundreds and hundreds of retrofits, and downtime was inevitable a lot of times. So, you know, we plan on doing that at night or the evenings. I'm sure I'm not telling a lot of you guys anything you don't already know, but for any newbies out there, it's free advice. Have a clear and well-defined scope of the project. Plan everything ahead of time. I think the major advice I would have right up front is the more you can plan ahead of time, the better off you're going to be. And the more you know about your equipment, the better off you'll be. Go to the next slide. So that's expectations externally. It's mainly all about the customer and letting him know what you know and what you're going to be coming up against. Something I'm not sure a lot of companies think about is the expectations for internal, meaning that you need to let your bosses, your supervisors, your company owners know that if you're going to take this project on, it's a necessity to have technicians who understand the legacy equipment, some of the peculiarities of that equipment, and Niagara. And then prior to the project commitment, do a thorough research of all the equipment. Do a site survey of the existing controls and get to know as much as you can about that site. That's an absolute necessity. Put a comment in here, don't let saving your customer cost you money. You know, I've seen a lot of jobs, some I've been involved in, some I've just watched as an observer, where next thing I knew, they were whining and crying that, you know, they had hundreds of hours in something or another. And, you know, I can't say that you're always going to eliminate that issue, but it comes down to planning. It comes down to knowing all the stuff involved in these jobs and the equipment as much as possible. Advise the personnel on the job that this is something I don't know that many companies think about, but your technicians out in the building are your best sales guys. They're repping you every day, day in and day out, and they can do more for selling the future of a control system or a replacement or a service contract or a turnkey contract or the next building that the owner is going to occupy or build. Those technicians are your reputation out there, and advise them that keep it upbeat, sell that stuff coming up, sell that stuff down the line. Now, what I'd like to talk about, and this is really the gist of everything we have to say, is the practical steps for a successful integration. We've touched on a lot of it, but for example, floor plans and equipment locations. Anything you can gather up from existing as-built documents, any existing system design, any old engineered drawings, controls equipment, and right up front, I would highly recommend that before you lose the old legacy front end, if you haven't already, get the point mapping of devices, if possible. Get the manufacturer's model numbers, which means at one point I'd say you really can't be flat-footed in doing some of this stuff. You're going to have to get a ladder. You're going to have to find this equipment. We may need firmware versions. We definitely need manufacturer model numbers, but the firmware versions might go a long way in whether or not the driver that you're planning on using is even supported. It's very critical that you get all the existing communication configurations set up. The simple things like baud rate, data rate. I've seen guys spend a half a day or more messing around with some of the communication configuration just to get stuff talking because they didn't have that information from the older system. And sometimes it's just not available. Sometimes that older system is dead and gone, and you have to feel your way through it. There is oftentimes going to be system-specific information. For example, with CCN, you have tables, and with some of the iNet equipment, you see it printed up there, address and tap address and DCU address. A lot of specific stuff that the driver is not going to know for you. It's not discoverable. You will have to have that up front. Confirm the access to the use of like we said earlier, the use of the manufacturer's configuration tools. Changes are not going to be possible on a low level. For example, an application-specific controller, say a VAD controller. You will have to have the tool that accesses that to make any changes if necessary. So at the most, what you're going to be able to do with the integration is to pull in all your points, pull all the data up, and see what is currently working and not working inside the unit, but you're not going to be able to make changes necessarily, programming changes to that equipment. One important point I'd like to make is to know whether or not you have application-specific devices or whether those are actual I/O, open I/O type field programmable devices. That makes a world of difference, and you need to know that difference, and because you may, at least from our point of view and our experience, it's probably recommended that the field programmable devices are a good candidate for replacement, since you definitely need to get access to that programming and make changes to that. So, research all your possibilities. Verify that a driver even exists for what you're looking at. If you're not sure, give us a shout. We have a list of all the current drivers available for Tritium, and that includes, really, it's across the world, from China to Europe to Tritium US and, some here in the States. Let us know, and we'll help you track that down. But One thing I would like to advise is point number 3 up there, that you look ahead of time at all the models in your building. And if your as-built documentation or your old engineer drawings don't show it, or your old front end and you can't find it, you're going to have to get a ladder and get up there and take a look at as many of those as you can and pull those model numbers and make sure that the driver that you're planning on using is actually going to support that model number. Now, if not, and you're really planning ahead and you're looking 6 months or a year out and you know you've got a good line with an owner on a building, and he'll let you do your homework, it's possible with enough lead time that development can be done for that model. And we've done that in some cases, internal development. It's always in the interest of the developers to develop their driver further than it already exists. I mean, it makes it a better product. It makes it more marketable for other applications. So it's in their best interest. So one of the things that I would highly recommend is that you verify the functionality of those existing controls. Because once you touch this stuff, once you take the project on, you're going to own it, and you own the trouble controllers, you own the problem programs. It's all yours. I think for those of you who have been doing it a long time, I know you guys know this. You touch something and you own it. I've had motor starters fall apart in my hands, and it wasn't my fault, but guess what? I owned it, and I had to replace it, so that's how it goes. Verify the condition and the functionality of the COM network. You know, it's just recommended that if you stress with your building owner, your client, that this is a big undertaking, and we really do need to step out and take the bull by the horn, so to speak, and really do some research on your building before we commit to a project that we're not going to be able to deliver on. That being said, you really want to check end-to-end on that communication network for things like end-of-line terminations, and make sure it's all daisy-chained and the right wire was used, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, it goes on, but I have seen guys just scratching their head for days with bad communication networks. So up front, you should be able to kind of identify some of those things. So, next. One thing that, in case you guys don't know, all these drivers come with a 2-hour demo mode. So, another thing I would get an agreement from the owner that, considering the project you're planning on taking on, would you allow us to come into your building and tie into this network and see what and how it works, and if it works, and are all the points there, and what measures do I need to take to get the data in. The third-party drivers all come with the 2-hour demo mode. You can just reboot, and by the way, any work you do while in that demo mode, it's a fully functioning demo, so any work you do is saved. It's still there even though the license runs out on it. Reboot the thing, start over again. So you can get a lot of work done in that demo mode and just keep rebooting it until you finally are going to have to pay for a license eventually. The Tritium drivers, on the other hand, you should have, as one of our partners or as a Niagara dealer, you should have a demo Jace or Jenny that would be available for you to carry out to the job site, load up the Tritium driver. Because it has a demo license, means it's licensed for all the features of any driver that Tritium offers, and you can check that thing out indefinitely. So until you're ready to go with your own purchase, Jenny, then you can get that feature licensed on it. One thing I want to notify, in case we have guys out there that aren't aware of this, please just remove that old front end or that master controller from the network before you're trying to do any discovery or recreation of devices. Most of these networks are not going to allow a second master on the thing. Most of these older protocols are kind of master-slave communications, so that's kind of a no-no. And if you're happy with what you see with your testing, then just send a PO, the host ID of the Jenny that it's going to sit on, and the name of the driver to licensing@linkspring.com. So, consider a few best practices when you're jumping into the buildings. One that I would recommend is that assuming that your model of your application-specific controllers, like VAVs, fan coil units, are in the driver-supported list, you should be able to get a big bulk of the building pulled in and controlled with very little effort. You know, I say that tongue-in-cheek, but yeah, it's a lot easier than the programmable controllers. Next, the programmable controllers we really need to take a hard look at. It may very well be worth your time and money just to pull those and replace them with your own control line rather than wrestling upstream with something in that controller that you have no control of or can't get to the bottom of, or end up taking over and buying into the configuration tool for the old legacy system. One thing you might consider is should you just go ahead and pull cable along through the building in parallels as a plan for any future, assuming you're going to own this building, as a plan for any future device replacement. And here I was kind of a joke. Don't be flat-footed. I've talked to guys on the phone that didn't know what model numbers were in the ceilings, didn't know where any of their VAV controllers were. Shame on you. That's not a good. You know, it's going to take time and effort, but there I listed. Make sure it's daisy-chained, end-of-line resistors, no T-taps. Maximum distance hasn't been violated for a standard 45 network. Make sure there's no wire damage. All those little things that just come back to bite you, and they will. If you don't know where stuff is, it will come back to bite you. It always seems to. If you don't already have one, create a communication riser and keep it as part of your records. I mean, while you're in the building doing all this stuff, know where you go from point A to point B to point C with the riser. And like I say, any rat's nest that you're going to find while you're in the process, you now own. So, you know, consider the little bit of time it might take to clean it out. I know it was always easier for me to just gut a panel than try to rig into the rigging. Anyway, so just a very quick example, the N2 driver, which is the JCI, we call it the IBMS N2, at least the popular one we sell a lot of, which is the MaxLines driver. You will still need to have the old Johnson tools if you're planning on doing any kind of reprogramming of the open or programmable devices. And by the way, I took this as an example. This is going to be the same applied to almost all the legacy controls you run into. If you have access to JCI expertise, or you can maybe sub them out if you want, somebody that knows the devices and maybe knows the JCI programming, and not just JCI. I'd say train, okay, you're going to go hire the local train office for a day to take you around and familiarize you with all the old ZN controllers and how those work, or the, you know, and I realize a lot of times that these are your competitors. You don't want them in the building, you know, you don't want them anywhere nearby. I don't know, sometimes you have to bite the bullet and say, well, what's it going to take? Is it going to take me a week to figure this out, or I can pay this guy a day to come in here and do a little consulting? One thing to keep in mind on I'd pretty much say on all the drivers, is that the override functionality of the outputs. In other words, if you right-click in Niagara, you do a right-click set or right-click override or emergency on or off. That does not carry over into these drivers. Sometimes you're able to do it through a Niagara point and then link it into this driver point. Just don't expect that this driver is going to fix everything for you. You're still going to be stuck with a lot of stuff that you didn't plan on. Once again, you integrate it, you own it. So, and I think you guys know that if you've ever done an integration. Heck, if you've ever done a retrofit of any kind, you know that. If the Intune controls didn't work correctly to start with, they're still not going to work correctly. So once again, you own it, you know, and the owner's going to be looking at you to fix it because the old line is, well, it never did that until you guys were here. So I heard that too many times. Come to find out that was usually never true. But so, and pulling another communication trunk in parallel is just probably maybe a good idea. That way, if anything goes awry, you can very quickly change over and get them back online. So LinkSpring as a company has some things that we can do for you. We have our own professional services. We have, well, I don't know what that is, selling and best practices. I don't know. Our Windows covering that up. Value added from LinkSpring is our own professional services where we can help you out with the planning. Point definition and sizing of a Niagara platform. That's something that we can help you, but that is always a moving target, as most of you probably know doing Niagara already. It's really, really hard to put your finger on that one, but we'll give it our best shot. That's about it on the solutions. The other solutions are what we're coming up with ourselves as a company, the new Edge 534, which is basically our hardware with the Niagara platform, the new Onyx IO. So they're getting to be proven products.
This is Mark. Just again, just a couple of the newer products that we've had out on, or we have out on the market. And just to a point to Peter's thing about the 534, we now have in excess, we got close to about 1,000 deployments getting ready to hit on those devices, which we're really good about. And as we're getting close to time, I just, again, Peter mentioned our professional services are here and available to speak with you should you run into some of these tough integration things that Peter had mentioned. We've really got time for one question, and I don't think this really is a question that has come through, is that it's from one of our viewers here that, actually it's a couple questions that have come through, and this one has come through a partner who said, Peter, thank you so much. You have saved our rear ends multiple times. Thank you for your great support and help, so we appreciate it. So again, thank you from that particular person. So here's a couple questions. Have most of the third-party drivers been verified on the Edge 100?
No, they haven't, and we would highly, part of our issue with doing that is we just don't have the equipment to do it. Our hands are tied sometimes, and it's a little frustrating that we don't have a building full of old Barbara Coleman equipment or whatever, Stafa or whoever. But we would welcome with open arms anybody that wants to try that, and I think from all of us in the tech support department, we would give you our best as far as attention to anything that would need to be attended to. In other words, we will get the developer to look at it immediately and say, you know, what the heck, over, let's see what's going on with this thing if it didn't work. That's within the parameters of that driver, the model numbers, everything we've already said. that if the model numbers you're working on, the firmware and everything falls into place and it should work and it works on a regular Jace, then it should work and there should not be a problem with it working on a 534. So, and if it doesn't, we will jump right into it.
Great. And another last question. If you upgrade from AX to Niagara 4, do the third-party driver licenses transfer as well?
No.
Okay.
No, they don't. You would have to get that relicensed along with your Niagara 4 license.
Great.
Now, most of the drivers are coming up okay. I think all the developers have had to attend to the new refactoring of the drivers. So, and there's still probably some little bugs with that. If I was in your guys' shoes doing an integration, I don't think I would want to jump right into an N4 integration off the bat. But you know, I'm not in your shoes, so.
Great. So again, from all of us at LinkSpring, we hope you've enjoyed today's webinar. And please make sure our next webinar will be coming up August 16th. And just want to call your attention to the LinkSpring Exchange and Technology Showcase that we'll be presenting and conducting October 1 through the 3rd in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we'd love to have everybody attend. And if we've got registration ongoing now, and we are offering a $100 savings from now for the next couple of weeks to help entice you guys. But we plan really good content and some new sessions. We're going to unveil some new LinkSpring roadmap stuff, answer some more questions, and give presentations on similar things that Peter has presented today. So again, we hope you'll register there, and we look forward to seeing you at the next 30 Minutes with LinkSpring, Wednesday, August 16th. Have a great day.